Good morning. This is the fellowship class on the book of Daniel. We have been looking in the book of Daniel for a few weeks now and trying to find out how to do this online. And I think I'm baby stepping my way ahead. And let's see see if I can get it to work today. We've got the book of Daniel. We looked at chapter 1. And when the youths refused to eat the food from the king's table, it's probably not a kosher issue. Their objections don't seem to really match the clean and unclean food laws of Leviticus. So something else. And one of the tip-offs is that when they ask for vegetables, the word they use is a curious word. It's the word for seed. It's not the normal word you would use if you just want to eat vegetables. So they're asking for seeds and water. They don't want to eat the king's food and drink the king's wine. There's nothing ever unclean about wine. They just want to eat seeds and water. So there's a sense in which we're supposed to expect that there's a new planting. God is taking these youths and planting them somehow, and he's going to grow something new. Chapter 2 is the great dream of Nebuchadnezzar, the dream of the statue, the head of gold, chest and shoulders of silver, then bronze and iron and clay. This is the empire statue. Israel is kind of over as an independent nation, and we're going to be in an empire time now, all the way from the time of the exile until the time of Jesus, and through the time of the apostles. This is empire time, and the empires are in charge of Israel. Israel's not in charge of itself. And this then significantly begins the Aramaic section of the book. Aramaic is the language of the nations, and because this is about the future of the nations and Israel's place within the nations. Then the statue is also about the kingdom of heaven. God is going to establish a kingdom. It's God's kingdom. And then there's this great this stone that strikes the feet and topples the statue, and then this stone grows into a mountain that fills everything. And this may be the source of the language that John the Baptist and Jesus are looking at when they say the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That could be recalling to people's minds this language from Daniel chapter 2. And then the big thing in Daniel chapter 2 is that kid Daniel, just a very junior member, a recent graduate, just an intern in the firm, he is set over the entire province of Babylon. And then, of course, we're doing that while Jerusalem still stands. This is very early in the exile period. Remember, the exile happens in 3 stages. Daniel and just a few of the aristocratic youth are taken away in stage 1. Later, Ezekiel and 10,000 are taken. That's in 598. Then 586, the rest of the nation comes. And so there's kind of a 3-stage exile that's happening here. Last week, we looked at the contest of worship with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the burning fiery furnace. And today we'll look at the last piece of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar's humbling and beast-like transformation. And then after this, Nebuchadnezzar is his days are finished, because look at the timeline here. We've got things that are sown in chapter 1, the statue in chapter 2, the kingdom statue. But look at the dates: 605 for chapter 1, where Jehoiakim is still on the throne back in Israel. 603 maybe for chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar's second year. And then 600 last week for the burning fiery furnace. We're jumping ahead a little bit now, 7 years ahead into the future, 593. And for Nebuchadnezzar's beast-like transformation, Ezekiel was taken with group 2 of exiles in 598. And then, but Jerusalem is still standing. There's still a puppet king back there in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem isn't destroyed until 587, 586. And then during all this time, Daniel is in charge. He's the guy at the right hand of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's sending his chapters back to Jerusalem. The mail went back and forth very freely. And the people back in Jerusalem would get this, and they're looking at it in Aramaic, and which would be a scandal because the Bible is supposed to be in Hebrew. So Daniel's in charge. This is the Aramaic section. Next week, we'll look at the handwriting on the wall. Nebuchadnezzar's grandson is in charge at that time. So here we go. Daniel chapter 4. King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell on all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. So this is Nebuchadnezzar himself writing and gives a personal testimony. This is his journal or his document of some kind. And this chapter begins and ends with Nebuchadnezzar's personal testimony. Look down in verse 34 at the end of the chapter. At the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion. We'll look at that more later, but this is a very strong bracketing device used here. So when you have a strong bracket like that, you pay attention that this is Nebuchadnezzar's own testimony. And so what's going on with these seed youths who have been planted, who've been lifted out of Israel and then scattered in the nations, and the seeds are growing, and now you've got emperors who are being converted. There's something new going on here. Not only are the emperors and the empires set up to shepherd and contain and govern Israel, but then there's a work of God within the exile, within the scattering, that is part of something new that's growing. This is interesting because here we go. Remember, Jude wrote one chapter of the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar wrote one chapter of the Bible. I, Nebuchadnezzar, King Nebuchadnezzar, to all peoples. He's got his signature all over this chapter. Now, it has seemed good to me, verse 2, it says, it seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High has done for me, the Most High God. Most High God is basically, I think, the Gentiles' name for the true God. Yahweh was Israel's covenant name. They called, and that's always translated the Lord in our English translations, or Jehovah in the older translations. But Yahweh, Jehovah, that's Israel's covenant name, and Israel would use that because that was their personal name, because for their nation. But when the other nations would talk about the one true living God, they would talk about Most High God. So Most High God, or God Most High, it's used by Abraham and Balak. It's used by Israel sometimes when they're talking about God of all nations is in view. So sometimes they use the covenant name because they're talking personally. But when you hear God Most High, it's a reference. It's a Gentile reference, but he's talking to the one true living God. Verse 34, at the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High. And then verse 37, I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven for all his works. So there are, Nebuchadnezzar, it wouldn't be proper for Nebuchadnezzar to be using the name Jehovah. There's nothing missing here if he's not using Yahweh in his discourse. Okay, verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at ease in my house and prospering in my palace. I saw a dream that made me afraid. As I lay in bed, the fancies and visions of my head alarmed me. So I made a decree that all the wise men should be brought before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians and the enchanters and the Chaldeans and the astrologers came in, and I told them the dream, but they could not make known to me its interpretation. At last, Daniel came in before me, he who was named Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. I told him the dream, saying, O Belteshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and that no mystery is too difficult for you, tell me the visions of my dream that I saw and their interpretation. So it's interesting now. We switch. Remember that Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they have two different names. their Hebrew name and their empire name. So we're kind of switching in verse 8 from Daniel, the Hebrew name, and because this is empire business and because it's an empire dream for the emperor, we're going to call him Belteshazzar, after the name of my God. This is the name of Nebuchadnezzar's God, and that's kind of the issue in this chapter. We start with him naming Bel as his God. He starts as Bel's man, but he's going to end up with God Most High and not be stuck with that. This is a translation issue here. In whom is the spirit of the holy gods? It could be just in whom is the spirit of holy God, or God holy, or the holy God. It's holy God is probably better here, not just the holy gods. And it's the issue is it's whether it's singular or plural, God or gods. And both in Hebrew and Aramaic, the word for God, Elohim or Elohim, it always has a plural form, even when they refer to only one God. The word has a plural form. So when you look at it, is it talking about gods or God? And the translator has to decide, and the listener has to decide which is in view. So here, Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, in whom is the spirit of the holy God. Nebuchadnezzar also already I think he realizes that Daniel is not possessed by many gods. He's possessed by the holy God, in whom is the spirit of the holy God. And this is how we can think about how the ancient man thought about gods. Nebuchadnezzar, here at the bottom, he and every other ancient syncretist would believe in multiple gods. There was Bel, there was Nabu, there was Holy God, there was Most High, and they were all kind of, this one does about rule, this one does about dreams, this one does about worship, this one's the God of the Jews, this one's, there were lots of different gods out there, and they all believed that there were lots of gods. But then there was kind of this sense in which there was something else. There was an unknown God out there above and beyond the others, and we just don't know about him. God presents himself to us only through these kind of intermediary gods, these subordinate gods, but then there's an unknown God out there. And so this is where Nebuchadnezzar, where his vision is corrected and cleared. And you can even see this in Paul's speech in Acts 17. Look down here, verse 23 of Acts 17. For as I passed along, Paul says, I observed the objects of your worship, and I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. So there is this sense in which even, all the way down to the time of Paul and Athens and all the gods, they had, they recognized lots and lots of gods, and they had many objects of worship around there. But then they also had an altar to this unknown God who was above and beyond the others. And here it says, when Paul says to the unknown God, the Greek there is agnostotheo. It just means unknown God, or an unknown God, the unknown God, or an unknown God, to unknown God. So that's this agnosto is ignorance, agnostic. You get the agnosto. Okay, so agnostic. This is the God we don't know. Verse 30 of the same thing. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. So the chronos of agnoios, the agno, agnosticism, the time of not knowing. Ignorance and unknown are basically the same word in Greek. So this altar to the unknown God, and the times of unknowing are over, and God is overlooking them, but now he commands everyone to repent, because we're making known what before has been unknown, and it's known ultimately and perfectly in Christ. God the Son took on human flesh and makes known who God truly is. Nebuchadnezzar in his day is getting a vision of what this unknown God is that's behind all the others. So in chapter 2, this happens it's stage by stage for Nebuchadnezzar. In chapter 2, it was the God of heaven. He's the revealer of mysteries. Daniel was able to um, uh, interpret the dream and talk about the statue, the head of gold, etc. So Nebuchadnezzar praises the God of heaven. He's the revealer of mysteries. Chapter 3, the Most High God is the one that we're supposed to serve and worship. And then chapter 4, it's Holy God or Most High God. And Nebuchadnezzar begins then to get the idea, wait a minute, all these guys are the same? It's not Holy God down here, Most High God over here, Bel over here, unknown God. Wait, you're telling me that one unknown God and that these guys don't, it's all this? So there's no unknown behind everything because he is over everything? Okay, so that's the light that begins to shine into Nebuchadnezzar's darkness. So Nebuchadnezzar goes on. The visions of my head as I lay in bed were these. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth. Its height was great. The tree grew, became strong. Its top reached to heaven. It was visible to the end of the whole earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens lived in its branches, and all flesh was fed from it. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said, thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it and birds from its branches, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and brawn, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. This dream I, Nebuchadnezzar, saw, and you, O Belteshazzar, tell me the interpretation, because all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known to me the interpretation. But you are able, for the spirit of the holy gods, or the spirit of God holy God is in you. And so this has got some interesting aspects in it. We can't talk about every interesting piece here, but one of the disputes is, let his mind change from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. And so what are we talking about? Are we talking about 7 days? Are we talking about 7 weeks, or about 7 months, or 7 years? Chronologists and historians begin to have a problem with this because we can't quite see what that's supposed to mean and how that fits into the chronology that we do know of Nebuchadnezzar's empire. And is there a space of 7 years in which Nebuchadnezzar can kind of be AWOL? Another thing to note here is that as I lay in bed, I behold a watcher, a holy one came down from heaven. Watcher or awakened one would be another way to translate that. It's an angel who has been given a mission. And in the old creation, remember, angels had rule and responsibility in the nations that's finished once Jesus comes. Hebrews says, angels are done. Don't turn to angels. Don't be involved with angels because the Son is the one to look to now. But under the old scheme of things, and this comes, you get hints of this in Galatians 3 and Hebrews 2, that there was a place where angels had rule and responsibility with nations. I don't know how that worked. We don't need to know, but there is this. There are hints of it, and so we say, yeah, okay, well, I guess. Verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. The king answered and said, Belteshazzar, let not the dream or its interpretation alarm you. Belteshazzar answered and said, my lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong, so that its top reached to heaven and was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruit abundant, which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field found shade. and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It's you, O king. You have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven. And you are dominion to the ends of the earth. 19, Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was dismayed for a while. First of all, he's kind of sorry for his friend Nebuchadnezzar. This is tough news. It's not going to be easy for you to go through this. He's dismayed. I see what's going to happen to you. But he's then also, I think there's a personal side to this too. He's worried that in Nebuchadnezzar's absence, Daniel's safety is in jeopardy. Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor, is always, values Daniel, but everybody else in the administration is jealous of him and is looking for a way to get rid of him and to send him down the line someplace out of the way. So there is that dismay may have two sides to it. There is lots, verse 20, the tree you saw, which grew and became strong. There's lots of tree imagery in the Bible, and it often refers to kingdom or empire. Think of the parable of the mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, and you plant it, but it grows and becomes a great tree where all the birds, the nations, come and nest. And so the tree imagery in the Bible, in fact, this tree vision here may have come to mind as Jesus preaches the parable of the mustard seed. People would say, "Oh yeah, the tree. Oh, I remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream, empire tree." Yeah. So there's lots of that tree imagery in the Bible, and that tree is you, O king. And onward, because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, "Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze. In the tender grass of the field, let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him." This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon my Lord, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox. You shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And it was commanded to leave the stump of the roots of the tree. Your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from the time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. Break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may be perhaps a lengthening of your prosperity. Nice word there. And then all this came upon Nebuchadnezzar. Don't understand it. We don't get any response from Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel says, "Here's my counsel." Silence. Nebuchadnezzar. He doesn't say yes or no. We just say, no, this all came on Nebuchadnezzar. At the end of 12 months, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace in Babylon, and the king answered and said, "Is not this great Babylon, which I have built in my mighty power, as a royal residence for the glory of my majesty?" And while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. "O King Nebuchadnezzar, to you it is spoken. The kingdom has departed from you, and you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field, and you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will." Repetition of what Daniel's text there. You put those side by side with what Daniel's interpretation, and then this voice from heaven. And immediately, verse 33, the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like birds' claws. Now, this is striking. It should strike us. Verse 31, while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. Who else in the Bible ever hears an actual voice from heaven? Think about that. It's pretty striking here. You can't think of many examples like that. Then So this is a very striking revelation from God to Nebuchadnezzar personally, until you know that the Most High rules the kingdoms of men. And then here's an interesting side note, verse 33. I can't let this pass. Nebuchadnezzar was driven from among men. He ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven. In the Greek Old Testament translation of this, and the Greek Old Testament was translated from Hebrew and Aramaic 200 years before Christ. This is the word bapto. So his body was baptoed with the dew of heaven till his hair grew long. So don't let Baptists tell you, the Baptists and the Presbyterians, when we talk with each other, Baptists will often say, no, bapto always means, or baptizo always means immerse. You've got to put it down underneath the surface. It's a washing thing, and you don't wash things above the water. You have to put them down into the water. And so don't let Baptists tell you that bapto always means submerge, because here's the dew of heaven baptoing a guy. And so he's not put down into any body of water. The water is coming down from heaven. So a little bit of a sacramental jab there. If you want to look at the vocabulary in verse 33, for what it's worth, we love Baptists. God made a lot of them. Okay, and then the other thing here is his body was wet with the dew of heaven till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers. Now, that's an odd, an odd way to say that he had long hair. And he's talking about eagle's feathers, and there's a connection here then with the vocabulary of prophets. Ezekiel, Daniel's contemporary, and Revelation both have four-faced creatures, ox, lion, eagle, and man. And many see these as references to the stages of history, or the sometimes they overlap. They're not necessarily in a row, but there are kind of four levels of historical development. The ox, lion, eagle, and man. The ox being a priestly time, it's man's infancy, just bring a sacrifice. But then the lion follows, and if you look at the Old Testament, ox is first, it's Leviticus, we have judges, we don't have a king yet. But then you have lion, it's the royal, it's the national. You get the King David era. But then you go to the empire stage, the eagle, the empire, the world, and we get into the exile with Babylon and Medo-Persia and Greece and Rome. And then finally, man, Jesus, the ultimate ruler, comes. And so the stages or levels of history are come there. And so there's a kind of an interesting connection here that Nebuchadnezzar, who is empire time, his hair grows like eagle's feathers. That's not an insignificant choice. Sometimes these odd little details. What do you mean his hair grew like eagle's feathers? Sometimes these odd little choices have connections that are supposed to kind of ring a bell and makes associations for us. Verse 34, at the end of days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven. My reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever, for his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? At the same time, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and splendor returned to me. My counselors and my Lord sought me, and I was established in my kingdom. Still more greatness was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, extol, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right. His ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. So we kind of get Nebuchadnezzar to the end, to his final enlightenment. He is his full conversion. Lesson 1, Daniel reveals secrets. Daniel's God reveals secrets. Lesson 2, Daniel's God delivers his servants. But lesson 3, this God rules kings. And these are the 3 lessons that Nebuchadnezzar learns, and then he responds. He's going to promote Daniel. He makes a law that no one can speak against this God. And then finally, I confess and honor this God. So it's very personal for him. The 7 periods of time we talked about, is that days, is that weeks, is that months, is that years? It's a very unprecise thing. It's also those 7 times. That's a word that's used for festival times, for the feasts. So it could have been the Passover, the Pentecost, the Feast of Booths. There's 7 feasts during the year. Of Leviticus 23, when you look at the Sabbaths and feasts. So those 7 periods that pass over him, it may be a sacramental accounting of some kind. It's vague on purpose, I think, because we don't need to know if we're more specific. But the 7 is the full. He's taken the full count, and it's 7 feast times, or 7 periods of time, 7 weeks, 7 festivals. However that works out, we finally get Nebuchadnezzar through all the lessons that he needs to learn. And lesson 3, this God rules kings. I confess and honor this God. Verse 37. And this is the last we hear from him. He's done. Daniel 4 is Nebuchadnezzar's done. He only lives another 20 years or so. Well, only. And then he's done. So next week we'll look at chapter 5.